Hello and welcome to Meeting People with me, Amal Pandya. Meeting People is a podcast where I have long conversations with rebellious, adventurous and sometimes courteous free spirits. Ben, thanks for sparing the time. Thanks for joining.
Absolutely.
Well, I thought we'd start with the last time we caught up, which was late summer, I think.
Yep. It was warmer than this.
It was
lighter than this.
warmer and lighter, and the leaves were greener. You took me to an underground car park.
Yep.
Not to do anything dodgy, suspicious, or sinister.
Yep.
Or illicit, but to show me something that I'd not noticed before, despite having worked above this car park for many years. Can you just tell people about what was interesting about that car park, where it is, and why you took me there?
Yeah, I mean, obviously don't want to give away my secrets, but I'm basically done with having one-on-one meetings in coffee shops and in meeting rooms like this, other than this podcast, of course. And what I like to do is go for a walk. And I'm lucky enough to work in the city of London, and there is, 3,000 years of history in the city of London. And because the UK is kind of chaotic, but kind of has a reverence for history, loads of it's preserved, but just in weird places. So London Wall, the original Roman London Wall that was around the city of London at the time, was below street level as it is today. And in a car park above what is the road London Wall, you can walk in, and in car parking spaces, I think 53 and 54, there's a 15-foot high, maybe 20-foot long bit of the Roman wall from 2,000 years ago, preserved entirely intact, without a sign, without anything indicating why it's there. It's just you can't park in those two spaces. And I find that when I'm taking people around and talking about work or about what's going on with my people who work with me or for me, actually it's quite nice to talk about something other than work, and a good way of doing that is taking someone to a car park and showing them a Roman wall. Yeah.
Where did you find out about it?
Combination of, I've been doing these kind of walking things for some time, and then when you look for the Roman wall guides on the internet, how which bits you can still see, eventually you come to a blog from, I think, some Swedish tourist who was like, and this is where you find the car park. And I was like, that must be near me. And then after trying a few doors just sort of on the street, I eventually kind of found it.
Well, you know what's embarrassing is I see myself most of the time as being quite a perceptive human being, but even since you took me there, it's only now I realise why London Wall is called London Wall, because it's above that wall. And it's just like, it's so obvious.
Barbican is named after the Latin for fort, Barber, and the old fort in Roman times was where the Barbican now is, on that corner. So it is kind of all around you, but you have to lean into it a little bit. And like, what a great way to actually have a working meeting. Go around, see some history, and talk about things other than what's on your desk in front of you. It's pretty good. Yeah,
you get some fresh air, you get some vitamin D, and also apparently there's something in, just being not looking at each other. I know we're looking at each other now, and I tend to like podcasts when we're at a bit of an angle, which Matt knows is a thing of mine. But we'll cope with this.
We can manage.
We'll work with it. But like, there is something about the adversarial meeting room or coffee shop versus the side by side, sitting at a bar or having a date at a restaurant, whatever it might be. Apparently, my dating days are long behind me, but it's better to not face each other.
Well, I mean, it still works within a relationship, right? If you go out for dinner, I'm telling you, you will have a less confrontational time if you don't face each other. Grab a bar seat or sit at least kind of diagonally opposite each other.
On an angle,
And I had, I think you can see in COVID particularly, when people spent a lot of time together at home, couples in particular, the seating arrangements dictated the kind of conversations they're having. If they were sitting down to dinner, you might have a bit of a formal. It is a bit adversarial. It has a bit of evolutionary history in it that we are, as animals, kind of both predators and prey. So we don't like being looked at directly. Like, find a dog, stare a dog in its eyes for a while, and it gets really, really angry. You know, it makes us a bit uncomfortable. We at least feel that, you know, we're under pressure, under scrutiny. Yeah. Sit side by side, like a car or on a sofa or whatever, and suddenly you're walking, even better. You're having a completely different conversation about things, maybe the same things, in a really different way. So I really, really like it, and I would encourage as many people as possible to have important and unimportant conversations in different scenarios than like this.
with your notebook, and also not hiding behind a notebook as well, because you've then got to actually take it in. I've experimenting with not taking notes in meetings which you can't do when you're walking, right? Because then actually you've got to every now and then you kind of write something down to sort of to kind of take almost as a procrastination or distraction tool.
Well, it's also you know, I think there's, what do I think? I think two things. I think it is an important signal in a learning environment that someone has a notebook, that if they are, you know, if you're going to a lecture or if you're a junior learning, you know, having a kind of educational situation, taking notes shows that you are actually trying to take something in. But if you want to have a real conversation, I think it's much more difficult the minute you put anything between you. You know, and that's what I would ban laptops and phones in meetings if possible.
Yeah, I've heard that, you know, even having your phone on the table takes something away from the meeting. It's like a thing there. It's an indicator. Even if you never look at it, it's a sort of signal that
you're not fully here.
I'm not fully here.
You're not fully here, and I don't. I think that is definitely in personal relationships. If you go out for a drink with your mate and you both have put your phones on the table, like, take them off, put them away, put them on silent. I mean, you know, like, human evolution has been hundreds of thousands of years in the making, and like going against it actually does make things a little bit harder. Yeah, you know, that is definitely true. So look, go for walks and find cool bits of Roman wall or old Saxon docks. The churches in. I mean, I think
you took me. Where did you take me? We're going on a kind of audio walk tour here, which is a great way to start. So
so All Hallows by the Tower, I think we went to, didn't we? By the Tower of London, where Samuel Pepys wrote his famous diary about the Great Fire of London, looking from the bell tower of that church. And inside it, there's an arch built by the Saxons with Roman bricks. You know, it's amazing. It's just a tiny little church by the Tower of London, and yet there's some of the most important historical bits: the Saxons, the Romans, Samuel Pepys, just hidden in it. And the other thing, I mean, this does now sound like a tourism attraction for the City of London, but we were talking about it. You know, there are churches all around the City of London that will do musical recitals or organ recitals, and you know, they do them for free on lunchtimes. And I was talking to one of my colleagues the other day during a walk, saying, well, hang on, next time we do this, we should pop in to I think it was a Swedish organ music recital that's at 1 p.m. on a Monday, and it's free. And it's like, there's so much interesting history and tradition, and you can just involve it in your life rather than go to the office, sit there, and let it pass you by.
It takes a bit of bravery to do that as well in a workplace setting. I mean, one example, even if you're working from home, the ability to go, actually, you know what, I'm gonna read for 90 minutes, turn things off. You feel like you're cheating or you're doing something naughty or something bad, and even if you know medium term will make you better at your job, what is that? Is that us being conditioned for it to live like we're in a classroom or factory? Or?
Like we're really bad at differentiating between what's important and what's in front of us.
Yeah. And
I believe from a kind of evolutionary perspective, that's probably because for a long time what's in front of you was most important. You know, if you're in prehistoric times and you have to forage for your food, if the food's in front of you, you focus on it now because you need to gather it or hunt it. If it started raining, there's no point thinking, in 2 days' time it will probably be dry. You need to get under cover. Yeah. So again, it goes back to what's ingrained within us, but there is also far more distraction nowadays than there was. If you're 10,000 years ago, food might come along. Okay, that's a couple of hours hunting, and then you've got 20 hours of the day to sit and stare at the sky, or exercise, or run, or whatever it is. And we don't. It's really important to fight for that space now, and I don't think it's a luxury, as you say. Read the Bill Gates or Jamie Dimon, CEO at JP Morgan. He has a week like Bill Gates does, where he will just take 5 or 10 books and go and read them. And he, you read Jamie Dimon's schedule. He gets up really early and doesn't appear to sleep, but he takes time to read the papers, to walk to a certain place, and I think it's really important. The problem is, as you say, being brave enough to do it. So I think it's important for people who do feel able to do it to encourage others to do it. So
hopefully this will help. And you either schedule it in, otherwise the temptation is to kind of respond to that email, which could wait. Yeah. It could wait 20 minutes or an hour.
I mean, a simple thing, right? A simple thing that I started doing in COVID, and these are not life hacks, and these are not clever, or they're not new, but turning off the incoming email notification, right? Because even if you work in a client-facing job, there'll be times where you need to sit and think, and that the minute you're distracted, it will take you a long time to get back involved and into it again. Yeah. And therefore, turn off those distractions, turn off Teams notifications or whatever. If you decide that you're actually going to have it's time to answer queries or be available or whatever, you can do that yourself, right? You could say, okay, I'm going to open on my screen my email inbox and I'm going to respond to things, and that's fine. But if you've decided you're going to go and read something or write something or put together a plan or think about something, getting rid of anything that might throw you off is important, I think. And the last, I guess maybe not the last thing I'll say on it, but is, I think it's pretty important for most people in our kind of industries to realise, you are not a brain surgeon working in the ER room, right? Whoever's emailed you, it may feel like it's life and death, but I promise you, 100% of the time, it could wait half an hour. Yeah. And if that's not true, then there's someone else with their priorities way out.
Or they'll call you, or someone will get hold of you if it's genuine. Exactly. I mean, I don't know if it's bravery or if it's conditioning or if it's laziness, whatever it might be. That approach is one that I've strived for and failed so often, where you kind of compartmentalize your day. What I would love is, plucking random times in the day out of thin air. But 10 to 11:30, I'm going to sit and read, and I'm going to do 2 really concentrated hours of emailing, responding to correspondence, doing the admin crap that at another part of the day, and I'm going to solely focus on that. And what ends up happening is that doesn't happen. You end up doing a crap version of both, where you're responding to emails, then you're checking social media, and then you're kind of you read a report or something, and then you kind of go around in circles, and it's just it's very tricky. But
it's also to the point you made, it's also quite hard to. And I know one friend of mine who's very good at sticking to the times he sends it. But you say you want to spend 2 hours doing emails, but you don't really know how long it is going to take you, and there's probably an endless queue of emails for you to work through. So it's quite hard at the end of the 2 hours to just say, no, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to do the thing I've stuck to. And like I said, I've got one friend who I used to live with, who was amazing at it. He was doing his MBA, and he would say, I'm going to watch the first half of the football game, and then I'm going to go and do my work. Now, if I say that, I know exactly what I'm watching the whole football game, and I'm probably watching the one after
interviews,
it. And then it's like, oh, you know what, maybe I'll just do the work tomorrow. He would religiously, literally, okay, that's the first half done, perfect, and then go and sit with noise-cancelling headphones on and do work. And I was amazed by it. And not everyone can be like that, but I think there is probably a point of acknowledging what we're bad at, which is maybe for you and me, I think we're quite similar. Like that bleed of things, you know.
Yeah.
Doing emails, okay, you should be reading now, but you sort of let it bleed into sort of doing emails and reading, then reading bleeds into the rest of the afternoon, and you know, making clear distinctions is helpful, but it's really hard.
Yeah. It's
really, really hard.
I saw a nice way of looking at it recently. I go through this sort of love boredom relationship with Tim Ferriss. I don't know if you've ever followed it. He's great, but then sometimes I just feel like I'm bored of learning about hacks. I need to actually now live a life of meaning rather than learning about how to live a life of meaning. But he did a nice, really good 20-minute segment recently about just, you know, if you're in the rut, here's some techniques that have worked for me to get me out of it. And one was start your day with the temptation is to start your day in reactive mode.
Yeah.
So you don't check your phone for the first hour of waking up.
Yeah.
Write something on a blank piece of paper or read something. But the moment you look at an email, you start reacting to stuff. And that bleeding point you make is kind of like...
You never get it back after that.
You never get it back, but also you feel... Again, maybe this is where bravery or courage comes into it, but like you're groping for something. You're almost like, even when there isn't an email, you're kind of refreshing or you're kind of looking for an email to respond to because that feels more like productive than writing that article.
Yeah,
and so you default to that. It's almost laziness to be busy.
Yeah, and there's so many, certainly in the finance world, in the investment world, I think there's so many ways to feel busy, such as, you know, everyone has Bloomberg screens or Reuters or Facts, you know, and there's a million news points, and you can click on them, and you can draw charts, and you can, you know, you can lose. People think doom scrolling is bad. Talk to people on investment desks who can spend the whole day, you know, pulling up charts and comparing this and this and this.
Have you seen the stock price of this?
Have you, like, is there any thought? Are you looking for anything? And they might say, oh, it's all market colour, and I'm just getting a sense of things. But I believe for many people, it's just an easy thing which feels like productive work but isn't. You know, it's just there are too many easy work adjacent distractions.
Yeah.
And that, I think, it is tough. Like you say, you've got to be brave, and you kind of have to earn it a bit. And look, I've been at my company for 15 years, right? And I know where I add value and that I do good stuff. And I think people trust that I do good stuff. So I'm a bit more comfortable doing it. But for people, you know, particularly one guy who works with me, I've said, look, you know, roughly you should be spending 20% of your week doing something that is different and interesting. And all I want from you at the end of the week or the start of next week is just like, tell me something I don't know. And it could be really, really mundane about, you know, something over here in the workings of the business. It could be something really, really interesting about a company I never knew. It could be something about, you know, whatever. And like, but take that time. And if I can let him have that time, then maybe if he, you know, in the future, you know, has someone that he manages, he'll say, look, I found this really helpful and important. There's an art to not being busy, but there's also a science to it. And the science is basically put some structure around it for yourself and for other people.
Yeah, there's an extreme example of this, which I interviewed someone recently who wrote a guy called Nigel Gilchrist, who wrote a biography of Pythagoras.
Yes.
And yeah, to join, this is apocryphal probably, but to join his philosopher's school when he was alive, the first 6 years you were in the school, you weren't allowed to talk.
Yes,
and you just had to, it's kind of just absorb.
Yeah.
Because philosophy was the act of receiving, not the act of doing. It was a kind of receptive talent rather than a pontificating or kind of ivory tower like chatting smart talent.
There's a few philosophers on Twitter who could do with a little bit more silence.
So look, this is quite neat because I wanted to dive in at some point on how you kind of, in a world full of noise, pull out signal to make decisions for your clients, for people that you're investing money for. But maybe to help frame that in context, like, can you explain what you mean? I've just kind of put your profile down here. I think this is informing your thinking. What do you mean by investment success comes down to understanding psychology. And the fact you say, I spend a lot of time thinking about prevailing narratives and behavioral biases which matter to markets. So can you just like frame what you mean by that?
So the big picture is that without people, economics doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Right? Take away every person on earth who's ever lived, and economics doesn't exist either. But gravity would still exist.
Physics still carries on. Yeah.
And so this sort of the tendency, which I think is, it is being pushed back on more and more now, but the tendency of economics and economists to build ever finer grained models to try and explain something is basically, I think, fruitless pursuit unless someone can fully map how individual people think, and even then you then need to work out how they interact with one another. And I think I can't remember who it was that who was famous that said it, but do I contradict myself? Very well, then I could contradict myself. I am vast, I contain multitudes, which is a really fancy way of saying
Darwin?
I don't think it's Darwin. We'll have a think.
Okay.
And the point there is that lots of people wander around with completely contradictory ideas in their heads very happily the whole time. And it's only when something happens in the world that they, that brings them either into conflict with themselves or the world.
Yeah.
And so it's, and that's absolutely true in investment as well. And you can have really, really smart, really, really intelligent people who have all the same information, process it completely differently, and come up with a completely different opinion about the same stock or investment, whatever. Put them in. Also, you could then put those same two individuals in different social situations, and they might completely change their minds.
Yeah.
So,
or if they hear each other.
And
then all of a sudden they'll kind of converge.
Potentially. Yeah. Or they might, that we all know, I suspect, people who, the minute someone else takes that opinion, all you're going to do is take the other opinion just to be contrary. We know loads of people like that. And so I think there is this this way of thinking about investing, which is that because it contains largely numbers, it must be largely scientific. And my view would be, no, I don't think that's true for most of what goes into investing, or at least there are no hard and fast scientific rules that are always going to work. The world changes all the time. But once you understand that there's a social psychology in play, that herd mentality will happen from time to time, you can think a bit more clearly about what investment strategies you might like to be in for the long term. Now, in general, when it comes to equity investing, most of the time, most of the people are mostly right. That's why, over time, indices go up and markets go up, and they bounce around a bit day to day, but most of the time people have got it broadly right about the world, which is that, the world keeps expanding, companies keep expanding their markets and their margins, productivity comes through. Okay, great. The thing that's interesting is the turning points, to try and work out whether the psychology there is something that is processing new information, or for some reason is processing the same information in a completely different way as before. Now, I think COVID is a great example of that. So, whenever it was, end of February, suddenly the information that everyone knew, there was a disease in China, but that's far away, so it doesn't matter. There's a disease in Italy. That's basically China, right? Suddenly became something that actually everyone became extremely worried about. Markets sell off, the treasury market stopping working, and so on. Now, what tipped that into kind of mass panic? I don't know. But at the time, we were having conversations about what to do in the investment market, and one of the things that's very clear in the team, but also across the world, right, was that everyone was panicked. Why were they panicked? Well, because their wives and families were calling them saying, should we flee the city? Because they were saying, can you stock up on tomatoes for the way home? Can you get pasta? Can you, and so when we were having conversations, it was almost like a deep breath moment. Okay. And one of the things we did on the investment strategy team was, okay, would you buy the market here if you had to hold it for a year, after the market's fallen 20%? And would you buy the market here if you had to hold it for 10 years? And most people said, no, I wouldn't buy it here if I had to hold it for a year, but I would buy it if I had to buy it over 10 years. And, we just wrote it down on bits of paper. And it's like, okay, and my boss at the time, who also kind of thinks a lot like me about behavioural stuff, was like, okay, so everyone wants to hold it for 10 years. And great news, we're a long-term investment house. So if we buy it today, we can hold it for 10 years. If you add it, it's okay. Which changed the conversation because people, at the very least, were able to take a breath, say, okay, that's a good point. The calm, rational me of 2 months ago would have said you should buy the market if it's down 25%. However, I forgot about that person because I was scared and I was worried. But they would still be telling me today, if possible, buy the market, which meant we could have a constructive discussion and end up buying some equities and some high yield bonds.
So now, if I was being reductive on that, or maybe putting you into a corner for something you don't mean to say, when would you not buy? It sounds like therefore the only time you would say no for that 10-year argument is if you thought the world was going to end. Is that fair?
Well, so I think for general global equities, buying broad, if everything has sold off, should you buy a bit of everything? Honestly, I think the answer is probably yes. If there is mass panic, that is a mass opportunity. However, when you might want to be cautious is, on a more specific asset class, let's say. What's a good example? 3 or 4 or 5 years ago now, there's this fuss about stranded assets. Are the big oil companies, basically sitting on however many trillion barrels of reserves, but they're just going to stay in the ground because green energy is coming through, and they'll all be, these are dead businesses. And oil companies struggled for, good 2 or 3 years on the back of that. But you could apply the same analysis. Okay, everyone's scared about the fact that no one's going to need oil anymore. Everyone seems to be approaching it in the same way. And everyone is saying sell the oil companies. And you could look at that and say, okay, are we genuinely in a situation where the oil companies need to be sold? Or do we need to apply some rational thought to think about whether the oil companies actually might be all right, so you don't need to do anything, or do they look like a buying opportunity? So there it was, you don't need to worry about it because you don't need to do something on this front. I'm trying to think of an example where you would end up selling. The stranded assets one is if you did the analysis and thought, you know what, this is genuinely no longer an investable opportunity. I think my honest opinion is that may be a conversation that investors need to start having, Western investors, about China A shares, about onshore China A shares.
Right.
Now, I don't think it's the necessary conclusion is you need to sell them all, or you need to bail out. But I think you probably want to at least have a conversation about whether the return you think you will get paid any return as a Western investor for being in China. And the kind of argument for that is interesting because of the Chinese market recently bouncing, but is that since the Chinese stock market opened, the Shanghai and Shenzhen opened in early 2000s, basically the value of the stock market has gone up to, I can't even remember how many trillion it is at the moment. Is it $7 trillion? Can't remember. I think it's around 7, but it's gone up to 7
a
trillion.
large number.
Yeah, huge number. It's gone from 0 to 7 trillion. Okay, great. But in terms of actual share price returns, it's basically gone nowhere, up maybe 10%. Because all the dollars have poured in, but all the benefits have gone to Chinese companies raising money. They haven't given them back to the shareholders in terms of price returns and things. So you've had lots and lots of new companies launch in China, take up more money, but that doesn't mean your overall return goes up. Now, so there, I think there is a genuine question of, look, what is the herd is a bit of a rude word, but what is the general tendency at the moment? The general tendency is to invest in broad emerging market indices, of which a portion, potentially growing over time, is allocated to the China onshore market. That is what everyone is doing, and everyone does it in the same kind of indices and products. Fair enough. But that's somewhere where you might challenge and say, do we want to keep doing this?
Mm-hmm.
Another example would be government bonds. Global government bond indices tend to have a high weight in Japan and a high weight in the US. Now in Japan, you get paid 0% on your government bonds, basically. So do you want to keep investing lots and lots of government bond money into Japanese government bonds where your yield is 0? If you think the world is fine, you're not going to get any return from bonds bailing you out, from being a protective asset, and the amount of debt is only increasing.
Yeah.
So one of the things we did, whenever it was a year and a half ago, was take Japanese government bonds out of our bond market, because we thought just because everyone else is doing it doesn't mean it's the right thing to do, particularly as rates might be rising. So I think you can apply that herd mentality, not just to crisis situations, not just to, oh, well, if everyone else is selling, I'll buy. I think it's probably most useful there to get people to take a breath. It's certainly harder to acknowledge when there's no panic and no mass, when there's no kind of big predominant narrative about everyone's selling. It's difficult to see what is the herding behaviour that's going on. Tech stocks in the US might be a really great example at the moment. Yeah. Everyone is buying market cap indices, which keep allocating more and more and more to tech stocks. If that falls apart in the way it did in 2000, you'll have lots of people after the fact saying the word herding over and over again. But the key part about that is you have to say it before.
Yeah, and do something about it.
And do something about it. Yeah.
So can I ask, is this what is risk to you personally, and does that map how you view risk professionally? And what I mean by that is I get a sense, with a bit like your colleague you talked about, where I want you to spend 20% of your week doing something that might be low return. You might come back with something not very interesting. You might do something that's a waste of time, but I still want you to do it because it might have it's got that asymmetric kind of value to it, where most of the time you'll just be plugging away with nothing in particular, but you might come with I'm trying to kind of think of risk from a career or personal perspective. I find that we as a species overweight downside risk and underweight opportunity cost risk. And for people not in the world of finance, someone very close to me says, I'm a risk averse person. I don't like the thought of starting my own business or being punchy in that meeting, whatever. And my response to that person is, that is a form of risk aversion as well.
Yes.
But you're overweighting downside risk and you're underweighting the upside potential. So are you trying to manage, and to kind of close the loop, is everything that you said there, is that managing risk to avoid blow-ups, or is that all the behavioural stuff, all the herding, or is that a way of making returns or generating money? It's kind of two questions.
I think they're kind of the same. You can, the sort of, I don't know, very harsh sounding way to say it is, you can make money from exploiting other people's behavioural biases. Right? That's when Warren Buffett says buy when blood is running in the streets, what he's saying is, if people are willing to sell you, $100 worth of stuff at $50, take the $50 and don't worry that
Well, he was more blunt than that, wasn't he? Because he said, it was either him or probably Charlie Munger, who said,
if it's blunt.
We're in business because other people do stupid things.
Yeah. And I don't think, and I've always been a little bit leery of calling things irrational.
Yeah.
Right? Like there was this whole movement about behavioural psychology, the irrationality of humans. But I'm not sure rationality is all it's cracked up to be, right? Because it doesn't capture everything in life. So the good example is there's an article about it, I think this weekend, maybe, and having a baby. If you do the maths as a couple nowadays, on having a baby, and probably even throughout human history, like the rational maths would tell you it is not a sensible thing to do, right? You are going to have to care for, and whether this is 10,000 years ago in a cave, an extra person, it is going to bring you, at least for the first 4 to 5 years, probably more of its life, again, let's assume we're in a cave here and you're putting the child to work in the field. I don't really know. But the increase in your productivity as a family is going to be some way off and not guaranteed because of death and risk and whatever. The extra work you put in, that is never going to amount to a decision rationally, looking at it from the point you are in time now, to having a baby. But there's a million other things at work, like love, like the desire to, all of that stuff that can't get captured. So when people talk about irrationality and being loss averse and things like that as irrational, most of the time I think it's quite normal, just what we need to do to get by. The thing is, when it comes to finance, lots of those risk averse behaviours are actually end up in making quite bad decisions. Whereas being risk averse being risk seeking in some domains is like actively dumb. Like commuting, it is dumb to be risk seeking, to not wear a helmet on your bike and to always run red lights. And
well, I'll give you an example on your baby point. I mean, obviously, you're less well off and you've got less spending power and you've got less time, and it's a one-way door. So if you regret it, there's nothing you can do about it. You can't go back on it. But no one ever goes, I regret having children. Well, very rarely.
Very rarely,
yeah.
Right?
But even within the early throes and during parenthood, I know many dads, and I've been guilty of this as well, where oh God, my wife's just being irrational. The baby's not ill. The baby's nothing wrong with the baby. It's just that happened. But the reality is, from an evolutionary standpoint, it's rational to over worry about the child. And the mothers that worried about their children more than had children that survived versus the mothers that didn't worry about their children. So there's this kind of genetic rationality over time that kind of carried through the generation. So what seems irrational in the moment, evolutionarily, is actually very rational over time.
Exactly. And you can have different rationalities based on your own time in life, who you are and when you are. Something you thought was completely sensible 5 years ago might seem completely idiotic now for whatever reason. I don't know what that might be. The things that I thought were really important when I was young, I'm trying to think. Unfortunately, I think I still have all my bad habits.
Well, look, just on that point, I hear a lot, we need to get young people investing. And do you? Isn't the best thing for young people to kind of go out partying, spend all their money and find a mate? Isn't that the evolutionary point of being young? And then you worry about the investing part later?
I think it's look, if you can, you should start investing as early as you possibly can, but not at the expense of living a miserable life. Not at the expense of, you live at home with your parents and you don't ever go out ever again, but you've got a really full bank account. Now, there may be some people for whom that is absolutely the right thing to do. Yeah. But for the majority of people, and I'm not saying I'm kind of necessarily utilitarian. Everyone, the best thing is the most happiness for the most people. But on an individual level, I think there is something to that. Lots of the, it's clearly just a reflection of lots of what I've been reading at the moment, but is, you have to think about things other than just the bottom line or whether you are being really sensible right now in the moment. And I think actually quite a lot of that applies to the way I sort of approach it and actually approach risk, to come back to what you asked, is I think you can use a strategy of bucketing. We're really good at holding different things in our brain. And if I think about my own investment portfolio, lots of it is diversified and really sensibly invested in stuff that you should own if you're about my age and planning on investing your pension. Great, really sensible. No financial advisor would ever have a problem with me. They go, oh yeah, good stuff. But maybe 10% of my money is in really dumb stuff, like stuff that you definitely wouldn't tell someone to own. I've lost money in silly things. I've made money in silly things. I've done things and then forgotten about them because I've kind of separated that part of my portfolio to like, okay, here's where I'm going to be stupid. Like, here's where I'm going to let that random risk tolerance or even just desire to do something. And I think people are actually a lot better at that than you think. And you can apply it to lots of things in life. Like, okay, I was thinking about this the other day. There are loads of people I know, people who work with me, who love cycling, but don't cycle to work. And they could cycle to work and it'd be 40 minutes of exercise each day doing something they like, and they've decided not to do it, which for them makes complete sense because they don't like the traffic on the commute and they think it's actually more annoying to get changed at the office or whatever. They prefer to do their cycling at the weekends around basically the same streets and the same places. And so, okay, that's fine. Like, if the aim was maximise your cycling because it's something you like, you'd just cycle into work all the time, and at the weekends you'd have more free time to do other things. Yeah. But actually, like, it's not maximise your cycling, it's enjoy your cycling when you do it. And I think Rory Sutherland talks about this with maps, right? Cars and when you're driving somewhere. And me and my wife differ hugely on this. She would massively prefer to go a longer way round but constantly be moving for an hour and 20, whereas I am very happy to sit for an hour in traffic, not moving.
If it's faster,
and trust that the traffic will get me there. And Rory Sutherland's point is, maps don't really distinguish between those. They say this is the fastest way to go, but actually for my wife, she want to go that way. For some people, they want to go the scenic route. I think there is.
My oldest daughter used to always wake up whenever we hit a red light, or stop moving. So like any traffic was to be avoided when you were driving. So to kind of not to close the loop, but kind of make sure I know where you're getting at. I liked your framing of using buckets. So like when you're you don't want your airline pilot to start taking upside risk. In his, but when you're commuting, as you say, don't try and jump on the tube as it's still moving or something like that, because there's what's the upside. But in other parts of your life, to your colleague, go and take some risks and risk failure. Now that, so. It's going to turn into a Rory Sutherland love fest in a second, but he talks a lot about the kind of exploit trade-off that bees have. So some bees do the risk thing and try and find new nectar. Other bees keep doing. What you're saying is that we've all got a bit of explore in us.
Oh, absolutely.
And actually, we need to kind of do that trade-off in ourselves. Other people would argue, look, the creative ones are just going to be creative, and others just don't have it in them. They're just going to count beans and they're going to play it safe. Or do you think we've all got it in us to kind of be rebellious, which kind of is the theme of this podcast?
Be explorative or rebellious or whatever. I think that's true, and lots of. So here's my pitch is that we tend to attribute that a lot to creative people in our society because they are the ones most frustrated, who find themselves most frustrated by our society and the way, there's a lot of capitalism, a lot of efficiency in markets, and you must do this and work for a corporate thing. They tend to be the people who buck against the trend loads. But if you put us in like Bohemian Prague, at the height of the artistic revolution, and there your rebel would be someone who just really wanted to run an efficient factory, and he can't because everyone's drunk on absinthe and keeps spouting poetry. So versus the like his exploration, I probably would be a he, I should say he, would be I just really want to get this business off the ground, and everyone keeps rolling in drunk and not really getting it. That is just as explorative in the right context, and I think there is a point that what I would like people in general to do more, and I think would make them happier, is not wait until you're frustrated before you decide to explore, which I think is kind of your point about opportunity cost, which is you could start doing a little bit of this already. You could start seeing whether it's interesting to scratch a little bit of that itch that you have, which is, I talked to my I've talked to my dad, and he said to me, God, years ago, I really want to write a novel. The thing I wish I'd done was write a novel.
Your dad said that.
Dad said that to me. It's like, okay, cool, great stuff. And now he's retired. And I was like, how's the writing going? He's like, oh no, I haven't really done any writing. I was like, well, why don't you start? And he was like, I'm very busy. It's like, I know you're not as busy as you were when you were working full time and having to support a family. Like, why don't you try? And I don't know whether he has yet. He'll probably listen to this and be like, I did start, but breaking that habit, it's not about time. I kind of use that example of my dad, who's just retired a couple of years ago. He's got way more time than he ever had. It's about letting yourself do it and saying, okay, no, I am going to write every evening. Or if you're in Bohemian Prague, start this company and get the machines whirring. So I think it is in everyone. I think people lean a lot more because it's easier towards the just do what's in front of you and go right back to start what we're saying. Do what's in front of you, not what's important.
It's habit and conditioning.
And what's important might be just a little bit of freedom, whether it's, and again, I keep having only creative example, like painting or reading or writing or whatever, but it could be anything. It could be running. It could be starting a different business to the one you're in. It could be there's all these kinds of things.
I hope you're right, and I think you're right, and I agree with you that I think the thing that holds most people back from scratching that creative itch is not genetics or DNA, where creativity is for some people, those rare few, and the rest of us are just drones. I think it is habit. We're kind of conditioned. We've been told to stay in our lane. The way we've been told that there's one way of being smart, and if you're not that way smart, then you're kind of.
But I would say so. Just to again, it's not just about being creative. It's about exploring and push and doing different things. Some of the classic examples of modern sort of heroes are people who worked in a restaurant or as a chef or whatever, but then put themselves through night school so they could get a job at an investment bank. That's just as explorative. Yeah. It's just everyone goes, yes, great. So they ended up an investor. They ended up an accountant. How good for them. Like actually, the urge to no longer do what you're doing and go and be an accountant, that's quite a big shift, right? That's an explorative thing of being like, I am not enjoying this. I want to be an accountant. For some people, it might just be that's an easy way to make money. I'm sure, easy is not the right word, but that that is just as an explorative initiative. But it's not seen in the creative light of and then they wrote a prize-winning novel.
Maybe we're too outcome driven as well. So maybe your dad is like, well, I haven't got the right idea yet. I'm waiting till my I need to do this course or I need to do that. And my skill set's not, and we're too, rather than the act of creativity is almost more of a way of being rather than that exploring, whether it's accountancy or whether it's cooking, whatever. An example of that I saw recently was a study where there were two groups. I think there were students. One group was tasked with making the best pot they could. Have you seen this?
Yeah, it's ringing a bell.
Because one group's tasked, make the best pot you can. Like you're going to think about it, you're going to strategize, you're going to have all the tools you need, and you're going to and then the other group was told, your job is to make as many pots as possible over the time period that was in the study. I can't remember. And then the group that basically the punchline is that the group that made hundreds of pots made loads of pots that were far better. Because you just got to do it. Yeah. You don't know which song's going to stick or which one's going to be a hit or which book's going to land. Yeah. But you just got to keep doing it, and it's so easy to say, but so hard to do. Speaking personally, as much as anyone,
And if it is, let's imagine it's in the creative domain, and you've spent your whole life in the slightly more orthodox space, where we used to, if you think about investment, instant feedback, or people in the business saying, "Oh, that was good," or you can see whether you sold it or you made it or whatever. Actually, writing 500 words each night and having them unread and then going back to them the next day. It's like it's a very you are right. The outcome driven thing is maybe the hardest mindset to break. Sometimes you can just do it to do it, but that's not.
Yeah, there's those kind of the Kobe Bryant thing of like the day after the championship, he's back on. He loves the practice and the journey rather
Tiger
than
Woods, I like practicing more than I like playing. It's like okay, well,
you're a freak.
Yeah. But a lot of us end up practicing way more than we would really want to if we sat down and thought about it.
Yeah,
I think.
So just on that upside risk point, I wanted to talk to you about crypto. Actually, let's talk about crypto later. I'll just go back to your point about economics being purely behavioural. It wouldn't, if human beings didn't exist, it wouldn't exist. Unlike unlike the laws of Newton. What is the experience economy? You've written about this.
Yeah.
Because I want to just try and get into your mind what you think is wrong with the world at the moment and what we can do to make things better. And I liked this term, the experience economy, you used to kind of think about what is UK GDP or whatever it might be.
Yeah, so I think there was this study back in the 90s of how economic progression, maybe that's the wrong word and too fancy, kind of works, which is you can have a commodity and you can sell the commodity. If I have wheat, I can sell you wheat. Then you can have goods, which is like, okay, I'll take your wheat and make it into bread. Okay, and that's pretty helpful, and you've made something better than it was originally. Or then then you move to the service economy, which I guess would be making you a delicious sandwich or acting as your private sandwich chef.
Yeah.
In fact, and then you have the experience economy, which is adding those kind of, again, this comes back to probably my fascination, those things that would be called irrational to a service, right? So it's the difference between, so you want to go to a restaurant and you want to eat, you want to go for a night out with your wife, perfect. And you go to an Italian and you order a really nice bolognese. You eat it, you go home, done. Or you could go to the same restaurant, same price, same quality of food, but the guy remembers you from last time. Oh, welcome. Oh no, we've got your favourite table. Make sure everything's okay. Yeah. And you know what? Like the chef remembered that you don't like mushrooms. They've taken them out of this, and free shot for the rest. Whatever it is. Yeah. We can all, I think, intuitively get that the second one's a better experience, but economically, nothing has been added.
There is a value to it, but it's not captured in GDP data, or it's not measured, or is not measurable.
Yeah, exactly. But those kind of things, particularly in a world where, most of us, or most of the Western developed world, we're okay on goods. Obviously, there's always going to be levels of society where this isn't true. But let's talk about the generalities. Like you're okay, pretty good on commodities, and probably can't do anything about it if you don't have enough tin. You're pretty good on goods. You're pretty set on services as well, right? When it comes to the simple things of like, can you get a holiday? Yeah, you can go on a holiday. Can you go to a restaurant? You can go to a restaurant. Can you go to the cinema? Yeah. But now what you're increasingly seeing is that you are more selective about which of those you interact with. And usually your selection, when you're thinking about it properly, is based on the experience.
Yeah.
And that is something that I think they talk in this paper about the I don't think they use the word industrialization, but I'm going to use it because I seem to be using it a lot at the moment. So industrialization of commodities, rather than hacking gold out the ground yourself or whatever, they're gold mines. Industrialization of goods, you no longer have to hammer your own nails out of iron over your own forge. You can go and buy nails at Robert Dyer's. Yeah. Industrialization of services. Yeah, look, we kind of are there, right? If you want accountancy services, just call up one of the big four and they'll give you it. Or it's a lot. If you want a restaurant, right, you can go to a McDonald's or whatever. But the industrialization of experiences is potentially a lot more lucrative and a lot more, maybe a lot more difficult. Technology might help, but it gets you loyalty from people. It gets you emotional loyalty, and I think that's important. Like, whether it's finance, whether it's restaurants, whether it's where you want to go and play football with your mates. That kind of whether you want to go and watch football. That kind of loyalty. That actually football's a really interesting one as a football supporter, because I'm a Tottenham fan. Right?
Oh God, let's end this now.
And I am getting an uncertain service at the best of times if I go to the stadium. But there is something else there. It's the experience because if the economic good was Ben watching a football match, right? Like, I could satisfy that rationally far more easily than going from where I live in South London all the way up to North London, a half-hour walk to watch us miserably lose in the rain on a Sunday night and come back. But I do go. And why do I go? Well, it's because of the experience and the loyalty and the emotional side of it, which means I go to Tottenham rather than Crystal Palace, which is much, much nearer. It means I go to Tottenham rather than Chelsea. And that, football does it accidentally. And there are lots of restaurants that do it well and accidentally. But it hasn't really hit the corporate service sector in quite the same way yet, I don't think. And people will say, oh, but it's impossible to make accounting an enjoyable experience, or a lawyer an enjoyable experience. And I don't think that's true. I think it's harder to industrialize it, but if you have if you work with a lawyer to sell your house and they're really good, I'm telling you, you should call them again, and you should also give everyone else their number. Yeah. If you have an accountant and you need them for your tax return and they sort something out for you, there's loyalty. You know people who have had the same accountant or financial advisor for years and years and years and years, but it's not industrialized. And that, I think, is the interesting bit of technology, of kind of connectivity, that means you can industrialize these things that we haven't really thought too much about.
Right, so just to make sure I understand you, because I'm sort of feeling a bit skeptical about that.
Yeah.
I think it's very hard to... Sorry. Excuse me. I think it's hard to scale that experience. I think you're right. We are in a realm now of kind of the experience economy mattering more and more, but it's probably going to be more localized, more niche, more for the kind of ultra hobbyist. But the value in a law firm or an accountancy firm is not fucking things up.
Yeah.
Trust. The experience is the trust and the kind of the safety and comfort you get that this person has done it for the Rothschilds. So if they've done it for the Rothschilds, they're probably going to be good enough to do it for me, or whatever it might be. Or they've done it for my mates, recommended them to me. To your point.
Yeah.
But they've kind of been the enemy of that is innovation in some ways, trying new things and getting things wrong because. Yeah. And so you're disincentivized in the service sector economy to kind of to try new things because the downside risk is too great.
Yeah, look, I'm not saying it's easy, but I think it is the way things almost have to go by definition. And the way they talk about it in this paper is, can you, using the horrible word that everyone uses, can you hyperscale customization? Yeah. So your point is right that it's individual and localized, but how do you make sure that as a service sector firm, whether you are whether you're a vet or whether you're a plumber or whether you're an accountant or a lawyer, that each customer is getting something that feels more appropriate for them and is talking to them in their language. That's what I always think about this stuff. Experiences basically come down to making someone feel good in the way that best works for them. Doesn't come across as fake. Doesn't come across as and don't get me wrong. You should be skeptical that it's easy to do. Yeah. But I just don't see a world in which it isn't the next step.
So the way I think this plays out, and the word you use, fake, is very important. There is to scale that experience element, you need to reintroduce the human angle. And what I mean by that is a corporate law firm or investment bank, whatever, goes to a certain, starts off with a charismatic disruptor, then it goes to corporatization. And then you get the professional CEO in, and then, but you notice that's, let's say, social media. That CEO will never have a particularly vibrant social media following, nor will the company who follows, shoesmiths or whatever. Oh, look, do you see that Goldman Sachs tweet? That was really interesting, right? Because it's the average of a committee. The outcome of that tweet is the outcome of the average thoughts of lots of people in a room, and a compliance officer and a risk officer. Whereas you look at successful service firms, or as successful service firms, let's take a Pershing Square with a charismatic leader like Bill Ackman, or a Fundsmith with Terry Smith. You need to reintroduce the human. And the problem with that is you introduce downside risk, because they may say something that's wrong. They may say something that turns out to be wrong further down the line. And
so the question is, can it
authenticity is the key.
And authenticity is humanity, which is fallible. I get that. And the question, there's two questions. One is, can that scale, right? And I'm saying I think there is a chance you can, in a way you haven't before, been able to scale that humanity into a larger corporate structure without losing some of it. But the challenge is absolutely that might be more risky. But you see the corporatization of, I think someone will write a really interesting study of it, probably in 10 years' time or so. Who's the CEO of Amazon?
What is his name? I've read begins with J. Andy Jassy.
I tell you what, you did a million times better than most people.
Well, the embarrassing thing is I've read both the Everything Store and the other one, the more Amazon Unbound. And obviously Jeff Bezos. But when I said beginning with J, I didn't mean Jeff Bezos.
No. I knew you meant Jassy. I don't worry. But that you're seeing as well. And if you read some of Amazon's reports and people who've left Amazon, they are seeing that the humanity, the charismatic leader bit, it's being, it's business schooled away. And what that means, that at the moment we've got this cycle, right? Company starts punchy, like you say, gets big, gets corporate. Few people leave, start small company, do well, it gets big, gets corporate. The interesting thing is, can you scale the kind of company while also scaling the thing that made it a success? And I think, for me, that's experience and personalization, and recognizing that they are much harder to quantify. You can't see them in a spreadsheet, but you need to work just as hard at them as you do on making sure the pipeline looks good, and making sure that the expenses are all
the market
covered.
share is growing.
And I don't know whether you will ever be able to track it in a way that is going to make a ACA accountant happy, but businesses aren't all about making ACA accountants.
But that's where you need someone who is going to has the internal clout to metaphorically put two fingers up where necessary and go, yes, there's no backward-looking data supporting this, but we're still going to do it. But your Amazon point is a really good one, because I don't know if Amazon has it moved away from its core principles, or is it actually doubling down on them? And those early Jeff Bezos letters are really good, aren't they? Kind of and he repeats year after year from kind of 99 when they go public to kind of 2000, whenever. The customer, we're here for the customer. Everything, we'll make loads of money if we keep making the customer's life better, easier, cheaper, more affordable, more convenient. I just think that Amazon's customer has changed from us buying stuff on it to the advertiser. And
the corporate Amazon Web Services who needs it to be.
So it's actually a brilliant business if you're advertising. That kind of, again, Rory Sutherland talks about it. If I want a Samsung washing machine, show me a Samsung washing machine. Don't show me 15 others that are where all the reviews have been gamed, all the like 5-star reviews, are kind of bot driven or been kind of puppeted, and then you'll kind of on page 4 get the thing you're actually looking for.
Yes.
So
that's an interesting
part of this is us as hedonically adjusting to a really incredible thing, to be honest, like Amazon is, and we now. But I find even Uber now is an example. Like, ironically, the more profitable Uber has become, or the stock price of Uber is inversely correlated with the customer experience.
Yeah.
I now, like, if I order an Uber, it doesn't tell you how far the car away is. You have to buy the car journey first, and then you got to cancel it and pay a cancellation fee before you know whether it's. Whereas before, back in the day, you used to know, okay, there's one 3 minutes away. Oh no, there's one 15 minutes away. I'll just walk. I won't bother. I'll get a black cab. And so, the kind of the internet's getting shitter as these hyperscalers kind of get bigger and bigger.
Or at least that'd be a really unfortunate trend, wouldn't it? Like, service is really good until the company becomes viable, and then when the company becomes viable, it's no longer good service for like. Yeah,
there's quite a few examples of this, of businesses that didn't make it once interest rates jacked up. There's all these startups, Kazoo, the car dealer.
I mean, that was a mad.
But
there was the one in the US, Carvana. Similar.
You just show your driving license and they put 15 grand in your account when they run the car through an algorithm, and then all of a sudden you've sold your car, and then they figure it out. They take it away from you. Funnily enough, like, it's a fine business if you can raise a funding round every 6 to 12 months for 5 years, and maybe one day you'll scale to be profitable. But the moment the cost of capital kind of becomes real.
There's a lot of there are definitely a lot of businesses that maybe got too caught up in the replace something that you're frustrated with, which I think is a brilliant way to be an entrepreneur. If something annoys you, can you do it better yourself, or can you think of ways to do it better? But then, they're now just replacing things that actually kind of work in a human world. So used car garages are actually a pretty helpful way of coordinating local supply and demand for a quite individualized good, and not in an inefficient way for the overall economy.
And there's a local angle to it that you lose, because everyone would use their local car dealer, and if that was a kind of clearing mechanism for kind of honesty, which they've lost because they can.
And so, like, did it look inefficient to always
an MBA student?
And it's like, that's not efficient. But actually, you know what? Like, it is, again, partly for the experience. And I'm not saying every used car dealer is an amazing experience, but having one conveniently located so you can check out the prices, that is worth something that maybe isn't taken into account again in those models.
Yeah. So I think you wrote something really cool about Herbert Hoover.
Yeah.
And Singaporean air conditioners.
Yes.
What can, let's say, we're recording this the day after the presidential election in America, and I don't know what feels like a long distant memory away, Rachel Reeves' first budget. Let's say, what can Rachel Reeves learn from Herbert Hoover and Singaporean air conditioners?
Yeah, so the Herbert Hoover thing is basically before he was a very unfortunate as well as disliked president, because obviously he ran slap bang into the Great Depression. He was head of the basically Ministry for Industrial Affairs, I think it was Minister for Industry, Secretary for Industry probably in the US. And what he did was basically introduce standardization rules, because there were 20,000 different types of screw, which means if you want to mass produce things, it's really annoying because every manufacturer you go to has a different width screw at a certain length, everyone, and different head sizes and whatever.
It's like plug sockets is an example of that. Yeah,
exactly. And the one interesting thing on plug sockets is that we are approaching standardization, right? With USB, we are getting there, really, gradually. But USB, actually, most places in the world now is a viable way to get around. So anyway, so he introduced the idea of standardization, and he didn't. The the interesting thing is, he said, there should be US standards, not for everything, and you don't have to necessarily only have one of something, but what you should do is agree as an industry what roughly the default is going to be for screw widths at length 5 centimeters or whatever it is. And so he said, look, as a government, we will not tell you what the standard should be. We'll give you the meeting rooms to decide yourself, and we'll just give you the regulators to hold people in your industry to it. And then as a government, once you tell us what you're making, we'll say, okay, well, this is the government version that we will buy. When we buy screws, we will buy largely these kind of screws. When we buy cots for orphanages, we'll buy these kind of cots. And what that meant was suddenly you got this like massive consolidation into producing similar things. Now, that might sound a bit weird and maybe even kind of communist, but actually what happened was people could begin to compare quality properly. So previously, if you bought a screw and it snapped, you're like, okay, well, is that because it was, a different material? Is that because it was a different size? Was it, you don't even know whether one is good or bad because you can't compare like for like. And so what he said was that, okay, well, now you should be able to. The people who make the best of something will be able to charge a premium, and the people who do it more cheaply, maybe can mass produce it. It gave people standards. Yeah. Which is really, really helpful if you want to supercharge an industry, because it lets competition flourish really, really efficiently. People are comparing the same thing. Similarly, it'd be a bit like, a good example is if you don't standardize railroad tracks, how do you know who makes the best train? You need to give people something to start with, so they're at least building,
So there's a pendulum, or there's a kind of spectrum, and in the kind of early days of modern capitalism, we were too far one way of being just too diversified in the things that don't matter.
Too many people in sheds making things, and sometimes making the same things, but then that's really hard to interact with one another and get the good bit of free markets going, which is comparing, and the winner will win because they're the most attractive. So that standardization side is really, really important for level playing field competition, basically, I think of it. The other thing that's interesting that you mentioned was Lee Kuan Yew, the Prime Minister of Singapore, and I'm seeing loads suddenly on the internet, and it's probably just kind of the bias, attention bias, that I've written about it, and now I'm seeing it everywhere. Yeah. But anyway, and one of the things when he became Prime Minister of Singapore, and I think GDP per capita was like $500 a person, was he put air conditioning in all the government buildings, because at the time in 1959, Singapore, swampy, muggy, monsoony place, far too hot, and people would go into the office until 9 a.m. and then go home, and then come back at 6 p.m, maybe go home at 9 p.m. You had this whole bit in the middle of the day where you couldn't get anything done. No one was in the right place. Obviously, there wasn't communication like we had today. So you put aircon in, which meant all the government buildings suddenly were working efficiently. People would come in, be cool as well. I think there's also the fact that just being cool while you're working is a bit helpful. And what that meant was, a bit like Herbert Hoover, suddenly the standard was set. Suddenly all of the other businesses, the banks and the accountancies, the law firms with the factories and everything, said, okay, well, we should put aircon in ours, because if we want an answer from the government, they're gone at 6 p.m. because they've worked all the way through the day. So again, you set this standard and you set the basics. If you can get the basics right, then it's really, really conducive to lots of different types of productivity. And in neither of those did he specify, Herbert Hoover wasn't like, you should build screws this way, or, milk bottles should have this kind of cap. He was just like, there's got to be a best one, you guys figure it out. Lee Kuan Yew wasn't saying, okay, the government thinks this industry should flourish. It's saying, we'll be taking calls from 9 a.m. till 6 p.m. If you want to do business quick, you should follow suit. And little things like that. And the last thing that he did a lot of things. One other thing he did that I think is really interesting was he wanted to make Singapore attractive for skilled immigrants coming in from wherever, from China, from India, from the UK, whatnot. And so he was very, very, very clear, and you can still see it today if you go to Singapore, that the entry to the city from the airport, the minute you step off the plane, should be easy and as beautiful as possible. So that when you get there, you're like, wow, okay, this is great. I like this place. You know, it's kind of like first impressions are important. So when you drive in from Singapore airport, you know, the road winds, so you get a bit of the sea, you get flowers beautifully. All the bridges that go over it are actually kind of architecturally really interesting. You see the city looming. You know, that.
Whereas you land in JFK and you're in the eighth circle of hell.
Oh yeah, or Heathrow, right?
Yeah.
You land in Heathrow.
This is a country that's given up on itself. Yeah.
You must be like, right, what's happening? Where am I? City of London Airport. If you fly into there, great.
Yeah.
Right in the heart of it, love it. But I think so. Getting the basics right, basically setting some standards, and then if you get that right, building a platform that is basically everything else will flourish on top of it.
And then getting out of the way, which is a key point, which it feels like, you know, the EU kind of was almost right in this sort of quest for standardization, but then it couldn't help itself and just kept kind of
and you know, the best people to design things are usually not the people who go back to your pots example. Like, I've no interest in what you and me agree the best pot design would be. I want someone who's made 1 million pots to come and be like, I think it should be this way. Someone else who's made 1 million pots be like, yeah, I'd tweak it like this. If you can get them to agree, brilliant. But some of the European regulation stuff, regulations in general, it gets so specific that it almost, and some financial regulation, you know, ends up just pointing in the wrong direction. You've got so much regulated about X or Y or Z, you've forgotten that the thing you were meant to be doing was making sure that, you know, the client understands what's going on. My favourite one, and you know, the FCA's rule that if a fund drops by 10%, you have to email or notify the client, right? Now, we've talked for ages about behavioural economics and loss aversion. Like, when a fund drops in a really short space of time by 10%, most of the time that will be because there is a pretty normal market crash correction going on. Happens every, 5 years, 3 years, or whatever. And most people don't even notice, right? Like, if they're invested in their pensions and they're working, they don't notice when the FTSE falls by 10%. They really don't. You know, I think it was over the course of a quarter. So can markets be up and down 10% over the course of a quarter? 100% all the time. And yet, if you force people to notice something that they would be ordinarily unbothered by and should be unbothered by, suddenly you have a really big regulatory problem, which is that people are panicked, calling to sell, asking why they were invested in the first place, and all these things. So out of a spirit of, you know, preventing people from being duped by, you know, funds that were just going to steal their money, which I think it probably came from, or obscuring information, you actually ended up in a really bad situation because it came in just before COVID, when not only was everyone cowering at home, terrified and hoarding pasta and worried about vaccines and their health, they were also like, oh, and now my finances are ruined as well. So you know, you can get this regulatory incursion. And I reckon if you'd have asked loads of fund managers to get together and say, when should you notify clients of an exceptional move? After a while, you'd have ended up with something pretty sensible, which, I mean, again, what do I know? But, you know, if your fund drops by 10% in the space of a day, yeah, you probably need to talk to someone about that. But if it's over the course of, you know, a quarter, what? Don't worry. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know what the answer is.
The point is, you don't know, nor should you. Probably isn't one, but beware the law of unintended consequences
we could
when you
all
put a
agree
rule in.
What we think was sensible, rather than just having to do what was someone decided was the right number, and that there's a big difference between those things, I think.
So is there a problem with lots of people, I think including yourself, but correct me if I'm wrong, democratizing finance? Do we want to democratize it? I'm all for democratizing as much as possible, but to be honest, most people don't give a shit about markets, and it's only weirdos like us that kind of take an interesting,
Yeah.
that find this thing fascinating? Or do you think it's important that people understand I think we've got education all wrong in the West, and people are leaving schools without basic life skills like knowing things like markets.
So I think most people should invest, and most people would then do very, very well not to care about investing at all.
Yeah.
I think we could be, I think there are lots of people who do care about investing who we could help more and be more informative and not use jargon for. But most people, I probably bored you with this before, but my analogy is chess, right? Mm-hmm. In finance, everyone who's in finance is obsessed with chess. Thinking about which move and which knight should go there, and okay, that's interesting, they've done that. Most people in this country don't even know that chess is a game that they could even be interested in. Most people aren't saving money at all because no one's even said, like ISAs, if you save your cash in your ISA, you don't get taxed on it. That if you save into your pension, the government will top it up by X or Y or Z. So we're here having lots of fun discussions about, okay, AI bubbles and tech, and okay, does equal weighting beat market cap weighting? Yeah. Most people don't care and shouldn't care about that, but they don't even know that they should at least be benefiting from it. I think of it, is it maybe a bit like driving? Maybe my analogies are failing me here, but most people are pretty clear about the benefits of driving and use cars to get around.
Yeah.
Most people have no interest in how an engine works or how the wheels are connected to the steering wheel.
Sure.
And they're quite happy to drive around, and then when it's broken, call someone, or hopefully it never breaks. Yeah. And I think that's my. Most people should be saving money into investments for the long term, in the same way that they go and drive the car. They don't need to know about oil changes and things like that, really.
Yeah.
But they do need to be doing it. You do need to, know how to drive, I guess. Obviously, self-driving will come in soon, and all of that analogy will be redundant. But
yeah, and the robots take over, as you say. There's always a human mind. What do you say? There's always a human mind behind every decision until
Absolutely.
The robots take over.
Yeah, until the robots take over.
Yeah. So let's give you omnipotence for a day.
Perfect.
If you had omnipotence for a day, I guess you could therefore become omnipotent forever because you'd have the power to make yourself omnipotent for more than a day. But that's okay. We don't need to unpick that too much. But what's wrong in the world, in your mind, and what boundary conditions, or what simple fixes like Lee Kuan Yew's kind of air conditioning unit or whatever it might be, would you do if you had the power for a day, or pick a time period, but you could click your fingers, or what one message would you want everyone to see on a billboard? Or
I don't know what I would do to fix it, but there is something just rumbling around my brain that social interactions have moved to we're approaching a tipping point where people's social interactions are more toxic than not, in the way that they consume information and talk to one another, and yet the things that bring people most joy or pleasure, or however you want to say it, tend to be the ones that have been around for 2,000, 3,000 years. If I dumped you in ancient Rome or Florence in the Renaissance, you'd be pretty bummed out about some things, I imagine. But I think you would be quite familiar with going to a bar with your mates and talking about what is going on in the day. I think you'd still have frustrations about the politics of the day or what's going on and the decisions of the governments and yada, yada, yada. But I think that the human interaction bit, to go and watch some sport, or to go for a walk in the countryside, or to eat a nice meal, those things really haven't changed through time, but they're just becoming less and less how people spend their time. And that, I don't know how you unwind that direction of travel. And again, like, right, I'm not hey, by the way, you should ban all social media or turn the TVs off at 9 o'clock. But it's that direction of travel that worries me. And the fact that you read all these interviews with people who used to work at Facebook or Instagram, whatever, and the one common theme is that they don't let their children touch it. Like, and you can read it, or you can see this in everyone. I left Facebook. Oh no, God, I don't let my kids near social media. It's like, okay, well, like, hang on, something's a bit weird there. And I'm not saying it's all social media, but it's definitely creating some pretty weird social behaviours that I then struggle to understand when you hear people speak about what they actually enjoy. Like,
yeah, it manifests itself in maybe. I totally agree that it's a problem. I don't know if it's the problem, but it's definitely a problem that's big and maybe growing. And we were talking about this on the train where we kind of with VR, maybe you can put the headset on now and not be in reality even, and then
it's like Ready Player One.
Yeah,
But
you see it within, like, let's take Instagram for example. I mean, I definitely think social media should be banned for at least until the age of 16, because your brain is just, you don't have your frontal lobe to cope with that level of immediate feedback and negativity.
I don't think most people over the age of 16
do
either.
I'm as bad. But I mean, God, if I, you got bullied at school back in the day, at least you went home and that was it. You had the comfort of home. Whereas now it kind of carries on.
That particular element is extremely horrifying. Yeah.
But and also you see it manifesting in very strange, but kind of. It's that. Is it the better crusties or the kind of the you end up, your behavior starts following the algorithm rather than the algorithm following your behavior. You do things that are worth taking a picture of. You don't take a picture of things that you are doing. People artificially augment their faces so that they look better on Instagram, in expense of looking better in inverted commas in person, because it's more scaled. Like, more people are going to see me on the internet. Therefore, it's rational for me to augment those features, even if it looks a bit silly
when you meet me in real life.
In the real.
So I don't know whether it's the problem, but it's one that.
Well, it's interesting. You've picked a real intangible there for someone who works in markets and has a kind of desire about, picking out data signals from all the noise out there. You've picked something that's very hard to kind of go to a politician and go, look, this is costing
could you solve this?
Well, look, or even, could you solve it? Or here's a problem, it's costing X percent of GDP points. So if you fix it, you could save this much on the budget deficit. And then, it's not, they're not incentivized to kind of.
I've clearly been reading too much about experiences, right? I just think there's quite a lot of people having quite a bad experience and they don't really know it. Like, again, maybe it's solely conditioned by being at Tottenham last weekend, seeing 4 goals scored in the Tottenham end and people taking videos of themselves celebrating rather than celebrating. Just celebrate. It's really good. Hug someone.
Filming it rather than watching it.
It's like, come on. This is all pretty cliched and it makes me sound about 100 years old, but it is. I think that is an intangible problem, and unfortunately intangible problems get less attention because I can't go to someone and say it's going to save you this much in the budget.
I mean, long live Jonathan Haidt, because he's obviously done a great job of just putting this on everyone's radar.
Absolutely.
My one, for what it's worth, and I'm only saying it because it's something I'm exploring a lot, and you're a man of influence in the right circles of finance and power, and I can feel Matt's eyes rolling because I kind of have I bored you about Georgism?
No, I saw the
good man
podcast.
Okay, yes.
Talked about it.
Cool. So, like, I've going to be releasing an interview with a guy called Akhil Patel, who talks about the 18.6 year real estate cycle.
Oh,
which
yeah. No, I've seen the.
You've seen him, yeah. I mean, the 18.6 years sounds far too deterministic, but we actually unpick it and we try and go through first principles. And I think a lot of, at least economic problems that we could solve will come from realizing the role that land plays, and I'll give you, maybe you'll like this. So I'll give you an example, so very quickly, the kind of thesis of Georgism is that, when land is privately owned and you're allowed to speculate on it and benefit from price rises, more and more the benefits of other people's work gets transferred to landowners. So as the country gets more developed, you get a stickier different type of poverty. Yeah. And that's manifest in homelessness in California, let's say, next to such big wealth. Let's say you were given 50K as you're 25 years old, and you, for whatever reason, you've had an accident or someone in the family's passed you a bit of money, 50K, 100, let's say 100K. It's not a huge amount of money, but you've got you don't have spending, your spending needs are broadly covered by your salary. So you're like, what do I do with this 100K? You could put it in the stock market and let it compound, which has benefits. But you've got this thing called the banking system, which is going to let you leverage that and put that money to work in the property market. You're almost pushed by this. Why will the bank lend you money to put in property, but it won't lend you money to put money in the stock market, even though the stock market, as you've already pointed to, generally goes up over 10 years. So your return is going to be as safe putting in a diversified basket of securities as it is, as long as you don't sell it at stupid moments, as it is. You've obviously got that enforced liquidity discipline by putting it in a house, but it will lend you money because of the property, and that in and of itself, pushing people into land speculation. The banks are willing to do something less productive, I would argue, that is more rent-seeking and does more free riding on the work of other people, because it's safer, because of the role that land plays in economics. So I'd love you to kind of you don't have to talk about it now, but just plant that seed and talk about it. And because I think it's the issue of our time in many ways for young people in developed markets.
I think it's really interesting, right? It is, as you say, and forget the stock market, but if I go to a bank and say, I'm going to buy this house, here's some surveyor's valuation and here's my deposit, and they go, yeah, fine, good stuff, let us know when it's done. Whereas if I go to a bank and say, look, I need the same amount of money to start a business, and they go, well, okay, let's talk through the plans for this business and so on. I agree there's probably a greater risk involved in me in the business, but it shouldn't be as hard and as difficult, or rather, buying a property shouldn't be as easy as it is. The one thing I'll say, and it's a really nice. It shouldn't be.
You're right. You're absolutely right. It shouldn't be from a societal perspective, but from a rational risk management perspective, the bank manager is absolutely right to go. Land is good as houses. I'm going to lend to that, but I'm not going to lend to you doing your speculative little startup.
Yes, although then that's when your stock market one comes in, where it's like, hey, look, lend me money and I think I can make more money in it. But the point I would make is the psychology bit of it is that mark to market. If you force a bank to mark its collateral to market every day, lending a stock market to a stock market will be the worst. You'd rather lend to my business and then come every 2 years and check that I'm making money. So that mark to market, the fact that you don't revalue your house and the bank can broadly get a sense of land and think it goes up, it's really interesting that essentially illiquidity allows an inefficiency to build up in the Georgian economics kind of thing. Because you don't know, because the house doesn't move around every day, a bank's more willing to lend to it. Probably the house's value does move around a bit. If you went to sell it today versus tomorrow versus whatever, it probably does bounce around a bit. And so I think it is interesting. I think I actually end up leaning on a bit on the financial education stuff as well, right? would suggest that most people who get mortgages don't really understand, like actually what they're doing, right? Most people don't use the word leverage and don't, think about collateral and think about that. And, there's plenty of examples in the UK of people who on the Help to Buy scheme with the government, didn't realise that the government gets this much of the house when they sell, and actually if they want to remortgage, they have to do it.
Well, Morgan Housel talks about, isn't it, that he's one of the most economically literate and not rational, but like most economically literate people on the planet. One of the best investment writers there kind of talks about how I knew it was rational for us not to pay our mortgage off because interest rates were low, and fronting up the cash we could do better things with the cash than pay off the mortgage. But as a family, we just felt
we want it.
Get it off.
The relief.
Not having a mortgage so whilst I could have invested in the stock market, so like you take the irrational spreadsheet decision for kind of well-being.
Spreadsheet irrational, but actually, if it gives you a sense of relief, great. But back on the Georgian thing, I need to think about it a bit more, because I think the point that doesn't really apply to the housing market in quite the same way is the benefits of others accruing to landowners, because I don't think that's necessarily true for me buying a house in the same way as the productive capital argument is there. So I think there's like a weirdness about buying a house versus investing in the stock market that's allowed by illiquidity, but also land being worth more and more stable. But it's the inefficiency of allowing land to accrue value. There's something interesting there, but I need to think about it a bit more.
It's I'm certainly no expert, and I kind of I'm definitely kind of groping for I see a problem and I'm groping for an answer rather than sort of but the concept of untying economic rent from sort of statistical data is really tricky to do. One example that Akhil Patel uses is he refers to Peter Thiel talking about the fact that all the investment he would do in Silicon Valley startups would be channeled from his fund into the venture capital, into the startup's balance sheet, into its staff's salary, which then end up going to pay rent to enable them to live near Palo Alto. So it was just a transfer of wealth from risk takers.
That's really good.
Or equity markets.
That's really good.
That's kind of economic rent versus, it doesn't get captured in, property is only 6% of GDP or whatever, but actually everything's probably, And
that's really smart. I like that.
Or like, you see it with, nurses in Sunderland will get paid X% less than nurses in London, and that's just taxpayers' money going into nurses in London's pocket and coming out of their pocket and into the landlords. But look, I'm in danger of turning this into a Georgism podcast, which I talk about just about every episode. But it was fairly sunny when we started. Not sunny, but it was bright, and it's getting dark. It was daylight. So I thought I would let you get off anything you have on your chest at the moment that you wish you've got outstanding through my traditional closing question, the long bet, which I've forewarned you of. Which is, I know sensible people hate long-term predictions or forecasts, but it's just a bit of harmless fun. Actually, before we do the long bet, you talk about Tottenham. I'm an Arsenal fan, so similar pains every now and then.
Bit more glory for you.
Sometimes we were too many close shaves, But I, is it helpful having a vehicle to channel your irrationality? So let's say I'm pretty convinced, with the evidence in my eyes, that there's, at least 60% of refereeing decisions go against Arsenal, and I know just about every other football fan for every other club thinks the same thing. But I am convinced, and I'm sure it's not true, but actually,
you can read stuff that will make you think it's true.
You can read, and you see it. You see it. Okay, that same foul was given for us that wasn't given for them. Do you think it's a good thing having things like that in society that let you just get that frustration out, and then you can think about, addressing your biases where it matters in complex domains like markets.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I don't. It's not just football. I think that is helpful. But yeah, you have to acknowledge the emotional side of you, and let it out where it's appropriate. If you think letting it out where it's inappropriate is going to make you make bad decisions. So we used to, one of the things we used to do as an investment team, every so often it kind of fell out of the habit of it in COVID, but we're like, we just need to go and have a Thursday night drink and a shout about all the things, just a few of us, but about all the things that we are thinking, whether it's the market or whether it's work or whether it's whatever. And I think a lot of financial or professional services would do that. But it was really important. It was really cathartic to be like, no, I don't know why. I'm just really, really worried about the US debt ceiling. I don't need you to tell me that I shouldn't be, and I don't need you to tell me that I should be. I'm just letting you know that what keeps coming back to is being like, wow, that's a lot of money.
It's like a worry diary, right? Like you just sort of write it down and you kind of it gets it out.
Football or whatever it is, right? I hate running, but I know for a lot of people, running is really cathartic to tick over things in your mind. So I think it's massively, massively important. You cannot be on, mentally on and trying to engage your system to thinking or whatever it is you want to call it. You just can't do it. You get fatigued, you get tired, you need to scream and shout and run around and recharge and all that stuff. And people always feel, I very rarely see anyone who feels miserable coming back from a holiday. They might be miserable that they are back, but no one's going to be like, yeah, to be honest, I just wished I was back at work. That doesn't happen.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, the long bet.
Yeah.
You've got a 10-year time frame for something that you would like to happen or you think will happen, good or bad. And we can revisit it in, let's say, a certain period to see if it's still on track, if you fancy that.
Okay. So one we were talking about before the podcast started, so let's just do that one quickly. I think the clocks moving forward and back will go within 10 years. Yeah. I think we're done with it. No one needs it.
To stay in summertime.
I would stay in summertime, but honestly, I'm not too bothered either way.
That's the second time we've had that on the podcast. So Chris Snowden, time zone activist.
I'm
now
not
Ben
time zone
Kumar.
activist. I'm just supporting the time zone activism. That's
could be your new future, kind of as a time zone, kind of a proper start.
I hadn't thought about it until today, but I could do it. The other one, which I'm sure I'll be proved wrong about, but I do not think in 10 years' time that VR headsets will have gone anywhere.
Okay.
I don't think that is the way that virtual reality works for most of humanity. I just don't see it being working in the way that everyone thinks it's going to now.
Did you ever watch Star Trek?
Yes.
The holodeck, is that what you think would be more... For people who never watched Star Trek, there would be a VR world, but you'd walk into it. There'd be a room that you kind of put me in a 1920s saloon bar, and then you'd walk through these doors, and then there'd be a saloon bar. Rather than putting a headset on, it would be kind of a room you'd go to that would do different simulations. Is that more likely, do you think? Or do you think the headset, or you don't know what VR will be, but it won't be
I don't
headsets.
think it's going to be headsets and glasses. I just don't... I don't think that will be the world. And I can't tell you why I think that, other than I've seen the new Meta advert where she puts on a big headset and sits in a waiting room, and it's like, I'm not watching that being like, I want to be that person. Everyone's looking at her really, really funny. So, I think that avenue of exploration is just a bit... I don't think that's right. Look, I may well be proved wrong, and I think Apple Watches had a lot of skepticism when they came out, and now everyone has an Apple Watch. I just don't think VR headsets is the way humanity goes. I think we talked a lot about eye contact earlier on. I just don't think I don't think that works naturally for the way people are programmed.
Yeah. So listening to Zuckerberg, and I really at one point in my life want to be able to refer to him on a podcast as Zuck, but I think until I've met him, I don't think I have the license to do that. But listen to Mark Zuckerberg. You hear the kind of tech bros saying, well, look, Zuck would say this. But anyway, I won't be that guy. His view is that you don't, when you're on a Zoom call, you don't actually ever make eye contact. You're always looking at them, but the camera's here.
Yeah.
And so, and then you don't get to use your hands. And so his view is that it's kind of democratizing travel maybe.
I think his first point's right.
Yeah.
Why isn't the camera in the middle of the screen, or can we move the camera around versus who's speaking? That's probably fair. I just don't think putting a massive hat on is.
It's definitely testament to Apple being at a rut or being at a crossroads now from an innovative perspective. Because, look, to your point about the Apple Watch, Apple would release a product that did, the first version would never be as good as version 4, but it would work, right? And then they've announced, and they've now discontinued those headsets, right? So
done.
And they said, look, this is very much a prototype. It's here for feedback. We're not, it's not ready to get. It's going to cost whatever number of thousands of pounds, but we're putting it out there, and that's a real step back for a company like Apple to do that. We're like, we don't have enough ideas that we're going to release something that is mass market ready. And then the next product announcement was some sort of AI collaboration with OpenAI, which was just an announcement about an announcement. There wasn't even anything to it. So they're groping. We need, and I'm not the person to know what the answer is, but we're groping to the next stage of physical technological innovation, like kind of device, and it
might not be Apple that delivers it. It might not be, because if the next thing is an iPhone killer, you've got to be a really brave company to develop something that's going to kill your multi-billion-dollar revenue line. You've got to be really brave. And I don't know how. Zuckerberg, to be fair to him, has said, if Facebook's going to die, I want to be the one who kills it by coming up with the next best idea. So fair enough.
Yeah.
I think that's real hard at Apple in the world of physical goods, right? I think that's really
hardware is hard. Yeah. And so we shall see. But yeah, for me, it's not big clunky headsets. So I guess I'm on Apple's side there. Yeah. Well, closing the loop, and I'm going to fail again right at the final furlong of not mentioning Steve Jobs in the podcast, but because I've got one friend who's like, can you go a podcast without mentioning? But big fan of, as you probably know, the walking meeting.
Yeah.
Used to kind of always do this important stuff, walking around on the move. So if it works for him, maybe more of us should get out off our feet and have a coffee in the hand and start walking. So really appreciate the time. It's been an absolute blast. Where can people find you? You're on LBC kind of once a week, is that right?
So I'm on LBC radio doing the business news every night, but only for about 2 minutes. Okay. And then every month or so we do an hour-long phone-in on LBC, answering people's questions, which is usually good fun because we literally never know what anyone's going to call in. Have you had any funky questions that you weren't expecting? Or has it been generally... I mean, you don't really expect any of them, because it can be anything from someone saying, look, I've got... What's very strange is they reveal really quite intense personal financial details on national radio that they probably wouldn't tell their best friend. Yeah. So I've just inherited £70,000 from my aunt in Ireland. It's like, okay, well, is this the first port of call? And it's actually a testament to the lack of financial understanding in the nation. The person they want to talk to most is someone they hear every night, talking about the footsie, and they're like, well, Ben seems to know. Yeah, amazing. So there, I am on Twitter at Ben Kumar.
Oh, got it.
Yeah. Very good.
Yeah, everyone listening, I'm sniggering away.
Yeah, loves it.
Stopping my sides.
Yep. And then that's broadly about it, really. I might pop up on various other radio and TV stuff. So look out. Yeah, well, and obviously LinkedIn as well, where you put some interesting articles up as well. So
thanks again. We'll do it again soon. It's been an absolute blast. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in.
Thank you.
This has been Meeting People. I've been your host, Amal Pandya. This is a podcast produced by Matt Cooper with music composed by Loverman.